All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for joining today's session of the Research Success Series. We're excited to be able to offer this series again this semester. We had a couple sessions last week. For additional sessions for the Research Success Series, I encourage you to visit the library's website, tarleton.edu/library. Scroll down and look at our calendar for more upcoming events. Today's session is going to be hosted by who I think is the ideal person to teach on this topic, how to write a literature review. Lisa Wan is the coordinator for library services at Tarleton's Rickett Library in Fort Worth. If you have any questions at all during the session, I'll be monitoring the chat. Go ahead and type it in. We'll do our best to get them answered. Lisa, go ahead and take it away.
There we go. Thank you, Adam. I appreciate that. And I will just go ahead and get started because I have a lot of information. Like Adam said, please put your questions in the chat. I'd be happy to answer them afterward. I'm intending to have a little bit of time for questions at the end. Okay, so let me get the screen share going. All right, do y'all see a screen that says, nope, got to get it shared. Do you see a screen that says, what is a literature review? Yes, okay. Good. All right, so today we're going to talk about what a literature review is. And the first thing to know, it's not an annotated bibliography. So what is it? A literature review is a review of the current literature. That is the literature in the last 5 years, unless your professor says that there's a different time range to look at. Everything that I say is bounded by unless your professor says something different. So I am going to give you the standard of what a literature review is, but if your professor or your publisher says it's different, then go by them. A literature review shows the current status of what is known about this particular topic. And you have to keep in mind when you're doing your research, that means you need to be researching very current literature. And then it's also going to show the differences in the information. That's what's alike and what's different. These literature reviews will show different things. So what are the articles that you're looking at? Are they saying a lot of this is the same, or things are really different? Or maybe there's a gap in the knowledge in this area. So when you're looking at the literature in this area, ask yourself, is there something missing? Should I have found an article on this aspect? Because that was something I thought was really important. So ask yourself that. And then also, you are going to analyze articles. Think about this, when you're looking at articles, you're not just reading them. So often for class assignments, you're just reading an article and taking that information and working it into your paper. But a literature review requires you to analyze the articles that you've looked at. You need to determine what they are about, and do they meet the job of what they are trying to do. And as I said before, a literature review is not an annotated bibliography. An annotated bibliography looks at one article at a time, whereas a literature review takes all of the articles, looks at them together at the same time while looking at the topic of interest. So we have a subject guide called Writing Resources, and the last tab in Writing Resources is the research process. So here's the 3 steps to a research process. If you want to see this full information, click here and it will take you to the hyperlink. The hyperlink will take you to the live page, the Writing Resources page, and you can look through these 3 tabs, but I'm going to explain them in the light of what a literature review is. By the way, if any of you would like a copy of this PowerPoint, please just indicate that in the chat, and then Adam has your email and the PowerPoint can be sent to you, okay? Thank you. So when you're doing a research review, the first thing you're going to do is design your research question. So do some preliminary research to understand what you're talking about. Look in these databases that I've suggested here to help you grow your knowledge. And when you have enough knowledge to create a research question, then you look at your research question and you consider it in terms of a thesis statement. So a thesis statement is what you're going to write into your paper and then do your research from. And if you notice here, the research question that was first asked when they were doing the preliminary research, how do distressed adults manage psychological problems? Fairly straightforward, but a thesis statement turns into something like this because you're telling them what the literature review will do. The overarching aim of the present review is to systematically distill information on the nature of distress tolerance among adults and its relation to psychological symptoms and disorders. This came directly out of a literature review that I looked at. So you can tell the difference. This is a much more complicated statement, but it's telling your reader everything that you're doing in this literature review, not just asking a simple question. Step 2, you find the search words within your thesis statement to actually go about looking for articles that you are going to describe in your literature review. So the thesis statement has these concept words: distress tolerance, adults, psychological symptoms, and disorders. Your main concepts are these 3 things, and your sub-concept is the population on which this search is being done. That's why it's your sub-concept. And then you're going to look in Tarleton's library databases to do research, and you'll use these words in different variations of searches to find articles that you are going to add to your literature review. So when you're reading your articles, you really don't need to read the whole article. You can skim. 5 to 6 points per article is what you're looking for, the best and most pertinent information about this topic area. And then you can put this information into your research synthesis matrix. So just briefly, these are the things that you might be looking for in articles. The main places that you'll find information for a literature review is going to be in the introduction, the discussion, and the conclusion. So the other things you want to look at, but your main places to look: introduction, discussion, and conclusion. And also think about the author's credentials. Are they qualified to write about this? Look at the publisher's credentials. Watch that they are following proper ethical practices. And then look for similarities and differences among your articles. So once you have begun to gather information, you can use this matrix to help you keep your information in an orderly fashion so that when you go to write it, all you have to do is go to the synthesis matrix and pull the information and put it together in sentences. So your main concepts are on the column on the on the left-hand side. These are your concept 1, concept 2, the main ideas. These are going to become your APA level 1 headings, are going to be these things on this side. And then you'll put the first name of the authors of the articles that you're looking at, individual articles in individual columns. And right here, you can see we have 4 authors listed. As you're going through your articles and you're looking at the information, write notes here about what you're reading in that information. Right here, you're already paraphrasing, and you can use the page numbers where you're finding this information to help you so that you can go back when you're writing your literature review if you really are unsure about what your note meant, or if you want to find more information. Also, if you take exact words, make sure that you quote them, and definitely give yourself the page number so that when you are translating this into your literature review, you know that you are using the author's exact words here. If you don't want to use those exact words, you can paraphrase them, but you're better off to know that this is the author's exact words than to be guessing, did I get the author's exact words? Oh, one other thing I wanted to show you. you can see there's quite a bit of information from Cornelissen on both of these topics. Stewart has more on the first one, not so much on the second. Bruley some on the first. Scott has a good part on the first concept, and Bruley has quite a bit on the second concept. But notice these blank spaces. These blank spaces could indicate that there is a gap in the information, say on this second concept. There may not be as much information on this concept as there should be. Maybe there should be a little bit more on the hardships because there's gaps here. So let these gaps be an indicator to you of something that might be happening. This is a research synthesis matrix that you can use. All you have to do is click here. It'll take you to the library's webpage where you will be able to get to this matrix. Actually, it takes you right to the matrix, but just know that it's available on the library's homepage. You can add, or one of the pages in the library, you can add your information into these boxes. The boxes will grow bigger as you add more information. So it is a live document that you can actually download and use yourself. So the structure of a literature review, I'm going to let y'all read this briefly yourself, but these introduction, body, and conclusion, pretty much typical of all papers that you would write. So just know that this information is here, and that's pretty typical. But the big point about doing a literature review is to analyze your articles. That is to understand what your articles are actually saying in comparison with the other articles, in comparison with the topic that you're looking at. So in your introduction, look and see what each article is about. What are the main ideas in the article? Do these articles correspond to your main ideas? And also to the other articles' main ideas. Excuse me just a minute. The methodology, just look at these details. Do they match? Are they similar enough? Or are they really weird? Did one research article kind of go off on a limb and do something different than everybody else? Was it a valid study? What are the internal and external validities? So in other words, what are the factors that are coming from the outside of the study or coming from the inside of the study that could be validating or invalidating this study? And then look at your discussions. Does the author's interpretations, do they align with the goals of the study? Do the other articles' findings work together with the article, with what articles you're looking at? Do they all say the same thing? Do they disagree or agree? Did any of the limitations that the studies had affect the study? For instance, did they study just one person or did they study a whole bunch of people? I'd say a study of 50 people versus a study of 5,000 people, probably your 5,000 people, depending on how that study was done, that might be more, that information might be applicable to a greater group. And then did the study actually accomplish its goals? And look at your authors and publishers. Does this author have the level of expertise needed to be doing this research? Or were they somebody who just decided all on their own that they wanted to know more about a topic and turned it into a literature review? Ask yourself this question. And what biases might be hidden, such as your funding sources or predispositions in the author? Do you know enough about this author? Do they constantly look at a topic and push this topic? You know, it's their favorite child. So do they ever criticize it in any way? Are they predisposed to always finding it to be a good alternative or a good option for using? And then consider the place of employment. Maybe the employer of this author requires them to say a certain thing. You might look at that, or the country that they live in. Does that affect the way this article is written? Those are things to consider. And then look at the ethical standards. Were the ethical standards met? Or were they violated or fudged on in some way? Especially for your publishers. Sometimes publishers have outside pressures on them to publish for certain reasons or not to publish? Did this publisher charge to have this author, or was this author charged by the publisher to publish this article? These are questions to ask yourself. And then in the gaps, see if was everything you expected to find in those articles? Was it there? Were there things that should have been discussed that got missed? And think about those blank spaces in your research synthesis matrix. Does that indicate anything important? So when you're reading your articles, when you're reading articles for a literature review, keep in mind you need to be questioning the articles that you're reading. Oftentimes when we're writing papers, you just take your articles and you take the information and you gather it together and write your paper for class. You never question about what is actually being said in the articles that you're reading. So a literature review requires you to impose that additional analysis factor on the articles that you are reading. And then when you're writing your literature review, this is where all that work that you've put in already comes to shine. You get to show everything you learned and found out and analyzed about an article. So when you begin to write, this is the question I want you to ask yourself when you are beginning to write. Or keep in mind, it's not necessarily a question, it's a statement. What I'm writing will provide my readers information on how my research contributes to the body of knowledge on this topic. And you might be saying, well, why do I have to worry about the body of knowledge? It just matters what my professor thinks. That is really true. It does matter what your professor thinks, but you might be able to publish this. Consider that your literature review could be something that you could use in a PhD paper, in your PhD publication, or even in the field itself. Just because you're an undergraduate or graduate student doesn't mean that you can't get something published. So keep this in mind when you're writing your literature review. When you're looking at the main concepts, which I once again will tell you will be your APA level 1 headings in your paper, then you need to make sure that these main concepts are covered by multiples of your paper, because the main concepts are important in your paper. And one way to show that they are important is to do these multiple citations. See how we have an author here, an author here, and an author here. 3 different papers have this concept in mind. So it says several studies have highlighted the need to report the number of participants. So that's going to be important. And you know it's important because you have the multiple citations. And this is an example that came directly out of the Academic Writer database. This is a database that the library has. You'll find it in the A to Z list of databases. And it's really, really good for helping you understand APA concepts. So if you need some help with APA concepts, go to Academic Writer. The next thing that you need to do, you can compare and contrast. And remember, every time you're writing your paper, you don't want to say these things were alike and these things were different and kind of just boil it down like that. You need to give really good supporting information and meaningful words about what you're saying. So you can see there were 2 studies, the NCS and the NCSR, also found, and that comes from a literature review that I've quoted quite frequently throughout this PowerPoint, and you'll find the link to it on one of the last slides in this PowerPoint. A main difference, not just a difference, but a main difference from the original NCS survey. So they're telling you how this one is different, not just that it was different, but it gives you the information of how it was different. Then you have Kessler and Neighbors. They did this search and found these things, and then the NCS data indicates this. So they're looking at these 2 studies all within one paragraph, and then they say the discrepancies in these findings highlight the importance of. So you can see they've used really good words to describe what they're finding. If you want to read more and see this article, you can just go back and find these places in the articles and understand more in depth about what's been said here. Also, you want to point out well executed or poorly executed studies. The words used let the reader know. They don't just say these were bad studies, these were good studies. They use words that tell you about them and indicate why they're good. These two studies, this study and its predecessors, provide the best estimates of. And then this study, women were inadvertently oversampled. So maybe there's a reason there that one's bad. Women were inadvertently oversampled. And then point out the gaps. Here's a really good quote that shows where the gaps are. It tells you how it happened. Yet is a good word to indicate, wait, something's different. And then surprisingly little attention lets you know, hey, something's kind of different here. They should have done more research. As I said before, discuss your author and publisher's biases. Understand that in your research, some of your papers will be more significant than others. And finally, all good literature reviews end with giving recommendations for the future research, future investigations, employ experimental paradigms. For example, the salience of different physical symptoms. So they don't just say, we need to do some different searches. It actually tells you what subject area you need to do more researches in. And in conclusion, in the end and in the references, you're going to have references at the end. You will have numerous citations throughout your paper. Multiple citations just let the reader know, hey, there's a lot of information on this topic, must be important. And you're going to include all of the articles you used. But if you find that when you're reading an article, they've cited somebody within their paper, then you need to go and find that paper if possible. So go to their references, do research, find their paper. But if you can't find their paper for some reason, then you're going to cite the article that you do have. So the Hunter and Smith article is the one that I had. So, and I made up this sentence, but you can understand what it means. According to Hunter and Smith 2010, so I had in hand Hunter and Smith, Kessler and Neighbors suggest that. So I didn't give any data publication for Kessler's and Neighbors because I don't have their paper. I only have Hunter's and Smith's. If your reader wants to know more about what Kessler and Neighbors said, they can go to Hunter and Smith's paper and find the reference information about Kessler and Neighbors, and then go and look up the Kessler's and Neighbors paper. And you also do this to protect yourself, because sometimes the way, say, Hunter and Smith interprets something that's written by Kessler and Neighbors might not be the same way you interpret what Kessler and Neighbors says. So keep in mind that just because an author has said it says this certain thing, it's better to actually have that paper yourself and to look at it and to interpret it yourself in your paper. And then know that your references will be somewhere most likely between 5 and 20 articles, unless you're going to be writing your dissertation. And then there's going to be quite a few more than 20 articles. But for your basic undergraduate paper, between 5 and 20. Here's the sample literature review. All you have to do is click on the hyperlink or type this into a URL, and you can get to this real life literature review that's out there in publication, and it's a really good sample of a literature review. Here are my references. Here's the contact information. And do y'all have any other questions or any questions at all?
I don't have any questions. I just want to thank you for doing this, as this will be my first literature review that I have to write, and I just didn't have an idea of where even to start.
Oh, okay.
Thank you for breaking it down in terms that I can like understand. It's like easy. So I appreciate Adam, you sending it out. As I know it'll be, I was trying to like jot notes, take pictures of the screen, like do it all. Thank you so much for sending it out. It was really, really helpful. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this.
You're welcome. And if you have any questions along the way, me or anybody else in the library can help you. So just go to that last page, that one that says contact information, and you can get all the help you want. But you're very welcome. I'm glad to do it.
Okay, and actually I do have one question. So in terms of writing literature reviews, the articles need to come from our Tarleton library, or can they come from, I think I get confused like there.
It depends on what your assignment says, but I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay, it depends upon what your assignment says. But most of the time, your professors are requiring you to use peer-reviewed articles for a literature review. That's pretty much all that's ever used in literature reviews. So to find those peer-reviewed articles, it's best to use our databases. You can find peer-reviewed articles outside of our databases, but the difference is being able to go to a resource that's really pure, that's set up to offer those peer-reviewed resources in a very accessible manner versus ones that's going to have peer-reviewed information and newsletter information and people's personal information in there. That's what you're going to find in the internet versus what you're going to find in our database. Is going to be specialized so that you can limit. You'll use limiters in your database to, there's a box on the left-hand side that says peer reviewed. Be sure you check that, and then you will be getting the articles that you really need that will give you substantive information for your literature review.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for Lisa at this time?
I would recommend that, you look, if you're going to write a literature review, download this literature review and look at it. Look at how they put things together. One of the best ways to understand how to write in a new style that you're not used to writing is to read what it looks like in that style, to look at a real sample, read it, and see what somebody else has done. And there's a lot of literature reviews out there, but this one is a really good one.
All right, like Lisa mentioned, don't hesitate to reach out to any one of the librarians for help or for further clarification on anything that Lisa mentioned today. Lisa, thank you so much. We really appreciate you teaching us through this topic, and thank you to the attendees who come to this session. Again, go to tarleton.edu/library and look at our calendar of events for more sessions in the Research Success Series and all the other programming that the library puts on. So thank you so much.